Hi again. Thanks for listening to the podcast. As ever, for our return listeners and for anybody that's new, welcome along to Sofeast China Manufacturing Decoded. It's episode 166 today, and I'm Adrian, and Renaud, our CEO, is with me. Hello, Renaud.
Hey, hi Adrian. Hi. What are we talking about today?
Today, well, we found a quite interesting article in the Wall Street Journal, and the article was from earlier this year, 2023, and it was about, well, it was titled "Companies Rush to Trace Sprawling Supply Chains as Sustainability Rules Loom." Bit of a mouthful. So what we're basically talking about is how you can track what's going on in your supply chain, because you might well need to do that quite soon, especially, I guess, if you're going to be exporting from places like China to Europe. This is a growing trend. It's a growing issue for importers, and that's why we're going to cover it this time.
Right. Not just how you can trace, but why. First, we're going to cover why it is going to be more and more critical. And sort of the usual difficulties, especially with Chinese supply chains.
Oh, yeah.
And then, what some companies are doing, right? So we discussed before on this podcast several times, including with Clive Greenwood, all of the changing landscape when it comes to the regulations in the European Union. Okay, and European Union has what they call the Green Deal, is a major initiative, and they are working on, I forgot, like 50 or 60 different directives and regulations, to renew some of them, to pass new ones, and it's going to impact all the products sold in the EU, basically. Now, some of them are very, very specific, like, for example, the battery regulation. So the proposal came up. We already have a good idea what it is. Okay, we don't have the details yet. Okay, it's only about batteries, you might say, but hey, it's also going to impact a lot of products that have batteries. So everybody dealing with electronics, portable electronics should pay attention to this, for example, right? So there's a lot of things coming up, and as we mentioned before, it's going to have a lot of impact, and it's coming soon. So the problem with these directives and regulations, that we can see them coming, and there's a proposal usually by the European Commission, right? So, for example, there's a proposal about the eco-design for sustainable products regulation. This regulation is going to have a major, major impact on a lot of industries, pretty much all industries except food and feed, but starting with a major impact on building materials, including lighting products, et cetera, and also on textiles, with a particular aim at fast fashion, right? These are the first two industries. However, all other industries will also be subject to this regulation from 2025 with the digital product passport and so on and so forth. A number of extra requirements that really are new requirements. Okay, so that's an example. Another major one is the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. Okay, it's still at the stage of proposal right now, but it will basically force companies to do due diligence into their supply chains, right? Upstream, right? Where they buy, and then where does this come from? Where does that come from, etc. Right? And there's also the corporate reporting directive. I forgot. Basically, about non-financial reporting, right? And this one is coming into effect 2025 for big companies, and then 26, 27, 28 for smaller and smaller companies. Now, you might say, okay, that's only for big companies, and that's 2025. Whoa, let's be careful here. Okay, for 2025, meaning that they have to already collect all the data in 2024 fiscal year, right? And so they have to put the systems in place right now.
Yeah.
And well, if you are not a big European company, but maybe you are the tier one supplier to one of these companies, they're going to ask you a lot of questions, right? And
No doubt.
if you are the tier two supplier, some of that might still also go down to you, okay? Because the tier one supplier will be asked a lot of questions and will also ask questions to their own suppliers, right?
Yeah.
So it's actually already going to impact a lot of companies in the coming month. And there's a number of others. Okay, I'm not going to go into everything here, but
No.
a lot of people in Europe they really underestimate the impact it's going to have. And in this article, I found it interesting. They quote a partner in a law firm. Okay, his name is Tim Constable. Okay, he tells companies, remember GDPR, that European piece of legislation
Yeah.
that was about personal data, and then you have the right to request that, for example, Facebook in the EU maybe would have to remove your account, and you have the right to request all kinds of data that they have collected about you over the years and all these kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
It had a lot of impact on a lot of companies, including non-European, right? Because they are present on the EU market. And then he says, well, all of these upcoming regulations in the supply chain, that's how big it's going to be. I believe he is right. Everybody's going to wake up and scramble and say, "Whoa, what? We have to do this, we have to do that," right? And a lot of these regulations actually point in the direction of you can't just buy a product somewhere in a showroom, slap your logo on it, put it on the EU market, right? It's already not allowed in principle, right? You're supposed to do an EU declaration of conformity. You need to have like the bill of material and the technical files and some test reports and so on. But all of these regulations and directives are adding some extra requirements about sustainability, basically, right? It's a very wide topic, but you have to collect a number of pieces of information about the product, right? So it's due diligence about what kind of substances are in the product, because if the product is not compliant to REACH, POP, ROS, and so on, cannot be recycled properly with some other products, so the resulting product also would not be able to comply with these requirements. So that's one issue. And then you have the usual, is it a durable product that can be repaired and maintained and recycled and properly disassembled for recycling and so on, right? And then you have, what about the manufacturing? Do you know where it's made? Do you know that there's no forced labor? Do you know that it's made in environmentally responsible manners, and so on and so forth? And this is really very wide, right? In the US, right now, there's a very big deal about the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act.
Yeah.
Right? It was passed in 2021, and then people were kind of wondering, okay, how is it going to be enforced? The customs are going to do something the way they interpret it, and so on, right? And then the way it came out is that Customs and Border Protection got really tough, and they blocked thousands of containers of solar panels because one of the ingredients of photovoltaic cells is polysilicon, and most of the polysilicon made in the world is made in Xinjiang. All right.
There you go.
But it's not just that. It's products made in China or Cambodia or some other places with cotton that might be cotton from Xinjiang.
I think it's even the labor, where if they've suspected that certain areas of China have well-known Uyghur labor forces, people that have left Xinjiang and they're working in factories, maybe in neighboring provinces, I guess is most likely. They've definitely scrutinized those and said no to some of those as well. Right.
And then what they do is they seize the container. So it's usually things that arrive by sea, right? At the port, they seize the container, put it in a certain area, and then they give, I forget, 1 or 2 months to the importer to say, okay, what is this? And do you have clear and objective evidence that this was not made with forced labor? And the importers would be like, well, we have this declaration from the supplier, and we have we have this social audit report, but the auditing firm was chosen by the manufacturer, something like BSCI and something like that, that's actually not independent from the manufacturers. And Customs and Border Protection says this is not objective evidence. Sorry. Have you actually done due diligence in an objective manner? Basically yourself or a company that you chose that actually went on site to check if it's not forced labor? No? Well, then we're sorry. You cannot provide evidence of that. We're not releasing the container, right? So it's been hitting a lot of companies pretty hard. And the general feeling that people have is that the EU, the European Union, is not really enforcing their directives and regulations very carefully, right? The different customs administrations of the various countries and the different market surveillance authorities from the different countries do it in quite a inconsistent manner, right? And the fines are different from country to country for various kinds of infractions. So that has really given the general impression that the EU is actually pretty relaxed, right? They might have a lot of laws on the books, but who cares? Actually, it's never checked, right? There's a little bit of that feeling. And the EU is actively working, the EU Commission is actively working on making it harder and harder for non-compliant products, right? So they've done a few things already. The directive that came into effect in 2019 forced the fulfillment centers such as Amazon and Alibaba and so on to actually be responsible for the compliance of the products they sell. So that's why a lot of Amazon sellers, have been sort of kicked out or have been forced to produce a lot of different documentations based on the risk level of the categories of products that they sell on Amazon, for example, right? That's one loophole that was nicely addressed. The eco-design regulation that's coming up, again, 2025 will come into effect, will force everybody to put probably a QR code, right? But they call it a digital product passport. So any consumer on a website or in a store can basically scan the QR code, go to a website and see some of the information on the product. Now, it's not clear yet what information, but the direction is very, very clear. The direction is, hey, very probably the declaration of conformity, of compliance, or the DOC will be accessible by everybody, plus some extra information, maybe about the substances that are in the product, any restricted substances, etc., because it impacts recycling, and things like that. Maybe a user manual, maybe some instructions for repairing the product, right? These things will be made mandatory and available to everybody. And then it will be easy for customs or for the market surveillance authorities to also scan the barcode. They will have a special access, probably with a password, and they will be able to look at the technical folder right there. Right? So it will make it much easier and much faster to check different products very quickly, right? Whereas right now it's okay, what is this product? Who is the importer or who is the distributor? And we need to contact them and write to them and blah, 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 and wait for them to respond and all that stuff. Now, everything will have to be ready right there, beep. And, at the touch of a button, they'll be able to have a quick look to see if it looks okay or it doesn't look okay, right? And if it doesn't look okay, based on the evidence already right there, boom, immediate fine, right? And then with everything else that that come with it, right? You'll be sort of put on a list of companies to watch a bit more carefully, and so on and so forth. So that's in the relatively short term, 2025. And then I saw also that the EU Commission has put aside a lot of money. Yeah, that's Clive Greenwood, who's been on this podcast a few times, told me about that. And then we understood why. The Commission is planning to basically develop a new IT system that will be common to all the customs administrations in all of the EU, right? So that means a product enters the EU from Piraeus, I should say, yeah, the port in Greece, or in Rotterdam, or in Marseille, same system that will be able to share all of the information about this shipper and this importer and this product category, and has it been like pre-declared in a proper way, or do we have very little information about that? Okay, that's a higher risk. If it's an electrical product, there's this and that. Okay, it's flagged for a quick check, right? That's what they really want to do. And then over time, even maybe the market surveillance authorities might be might become part of customs or something like that, right? There's a lot of speculation. We don't really know, obviously. And here we're more talking 2028, 2030, right? So it's not short term. It's not short term. However, this is the way it's going, right? So a lot of SMEs are still sort of waiting, but bigger companies are on the move now. I mean, they are waking up, and they have already woken up, right? And all of this, to get back to what you said at the beginning of the episode, is all of this is pointing companies to, okay, how do we do proper due diligence upstream in our supply chain, right? In the suppliers and the suppliers of the suppliers, and so on and so forth, right? So how?
That's a scary thought. I wonder if everybody who's listening, if we could have like a virtual show of hands. I mean, I wonder how many listeners can honestly say, yeah, I've got complete transparency over my supply chain that is in, say, China or wherever it is.
Especially China, because things tend to be a bit murky, they don't like transparency. This is a country where, your personal network, who you know and who you can call for a favor, etc., is seen as a major asset, right? And that's why LinkedIn didn't really work here, because people don't really want to add all the high-level connections there for everybody else to know, and so on, right?
Yeah.
So actually, it's really the country of who you know, right? So they don't want to show who their suppliers are. To them, it's really a well-guarded secret, right? And their suppliers, in turn, don't want the customers to know, and so on. So tier 1 is hiding, tier 2 is hiding, tier 3 is hiding, and so on. So even if your tier 1 supplier is the most cooperative supplier in the world, you'll probably not know anything beyond tier 2, except if your purchasing volume is pretty high, right? And if you did the sourcing, all of the hard work already at the sourcing stage, meaning that when you qualified new suppliers, you already get them to sign the proper document and agree on certain rules, and already disclose a lot of the information, and so on and so forth, right? Some big companies are good at that. And if you are a big and famous company, your tier 1 supplier will tell the tier 2 supplier, hey, we're selling to these guys, but they force us to disclose that, whatever, General Motors or whatever, Siemens, they request us to do that. Okay. And then the tier 2 supplier can go back to tier 3 supplier and tell them.
Yes.
Until it breaks down, because maybe, one of the suppliers doesn't care, usually because the commercial amount is not very high at that point. And like, who cares what you want to buy for 5,000 RMB of this? Then you want to know who my supplier is? Like, take a hike, right? But if you say, hey, we're going to buy 100 million RMB of this material every year if we get the contract for this new customer, people look at you with round eyes and say, okay, what, how high do I jump?
What do you need? Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
It's quite different.
If there are, maybe you're going to speak maybe a little bit more about some of the giant companies that are, starting to mobilize on this with urgency, but with smaller businesses who are importing into, say, the EU, right? And maybe some of them at this point are still not really thinking about this as much as perhaps they should be, right? Based on what we're talking about. Their Chinese suppliers, they're definitely not going to be caring about this at all at the moment.
Oh, yeah. So that's really the big challenge, is that Chinese supplier, it's not on their radar. They don't care about all this. They're not following up on what the EU Commission says or does, because historically they never had to care really about it, right? They, in most cases, they are totally off the radar also of the market surveillance authorities, because a company buys their product and distributes it without putting their name on it, meaning that who has ultimate responsibility for compliance is the importer, okay? Because they are actually the quote-unquote manufacturer, right?
Yeah.
So that's the situation. They don't really care. Okay, it's got to have CE mark. Okay, we put a CE logo in a mold, so you have the CE mark. You're happy, right? Oh, CE marking is more than that. Okay, there's got to be a notified body. We got to test this way. Okay. Well, who pays for the testing, right? And it becomes a commercial negotiation. And okay, there should not be any lead, ROS, REACH. Okay, right? So to them, it's sort of a game of, okay, these are a few hoops to jump through, and then that's it. We can sell, right? But all this sustainability stuff, they really don't care much. And their first response usually is, well, why are you asking me for this? I'm compliant in China. The Chinese government is tough on these things. They don't want us to pollute too much. We comply with Chinese regulations. Meaning, like, hey, you sell in the EU, you handle the EU side. But the EU Commission really doesn't agree with that at all, right? In their view, it's more like, hey, you want to put this product here, you got to design it properly, and you get to know exactly how it's made and where it's made, right? So, for example, the battery regulation. So the proposal was unveiled a few months back. Okay, we don't know all the details yet, but we know for sure certain things. I mean, for sure, I should say 95% sure, because it's not voted yet. It might change, but it's probably not going to change. So what do we already know is that when you buy certain types of batteries, right, there's a certain scope. Well, then you need to know where the pack is done, where the cells are made. And also, you need to have some kind of traceability to potential conflict minerals, right? Because, hey, cobalt, nickel, these kind of things, lithium, where do they come from, right? Oh, that comes from some kind of forced labor camp in, deep in Congo. Oh, that's really bad, right? So they don't want that. The EU basically says, we don't want all these, they don't want to see these Chinese batteries, but we don't want all these batteries that are sent to the EU and nobody knows what they're made of and where they're made. Like, that's it, over, game over. And there will be a passport on every one of them. So it's very easy for someone to double check these kind of things, right? It doesn't mean that the pack manufacturer and the cell manufacturer and so on will be accessible by any consumer. We don't know that yet. Okay. However, market surveillance authorities and the customs will definitely have very easy access, right? And more, as I mentioned. So, if you don't do any due diligence, if you don't know anything, you're kind of stuck. But the problem is, you go to your battery manufacturer now, and you tell them, hey, we need to start to collect this information. Well, if you buy €500 million of batteries every year from them, you can probably get, quite a bit of information, right? If you make it very clear, it's a criterion for sourcing new suppliers, it's a criterion for reconducting you as a supplier next year, etc. But if you buy €30,000, of batteries here and there, and you always negotiate on price, and they don't know how long you're going to be, they don't want to hear anything. They don't.
Good luck getting a response.
Right. And again, this is especially difficult with China because, as I mentioned, the business environment there is not very transparent, on purpose. In buyer-supplier relationships is very opaque. But also in China, there tends to be an enormous amount of intermediaries, right?
Yep.
Oh, it's so much more convenient. I'll buy it from the local guys, the local distributor, the local whatever, local intermediary. And you have so many intermediaries living on a very slight margin sometimes, right? But they take care of a portion of the supply chain. They bring the products from here to here, or they help finance a little bit, or, they repackage or whatever, right? But the problem is, between you and the mine, who knows where the potential conflict minerals are extracted. It's not like there's 3-4 suppliers. There might be a dozen suppliers, right? I mean, from the mine, then it goes to that intermediary that sends it to that wholesaler, blah blah, and then finally it's sent to probably to China for processing, and after processing is distributed by that company, and then it's sent to that for that kind of other processing, and then again another intermediary, and right? And then down the road, your product went through the hands of a dozen companies. So that's a supply chain that is totally unmanaged, right? So if you start to actually manage your supply chain, well, it's not about looking at the price of the container and talking to your freight forwarder and putting some pressure on your direct supplier. Now, if you sell on the EU market, supply chain management means you actually have to manage the supply chain, sort of all the way up, right? Not for all of the components that go into, for example, a battery, but a number of things. Textile, where does the cotton come from is one thing. Why is there so much oil-based synthetic fibers, right? And what can we do about that to reduce the impact upstream and downstream, including all the microplastics when it goes into a washing machine and so on and so forth, right? You actually have to grab the horns of the bull, right? That's sorry for the image, but it goes from a totally free supply chain to a supply chain that will actually be managed. And who's going to manage your supply chain? Is it you? Is it your customers? Right?
It's the big question, isn't it? Because there's a lot to do for some people.
Right. Oh, yes, and it's an unsurmountable challenge for some companies. But it's pretty clear the European Commission couldn't care less. There's certain companies that, in their eyes, probably should disappear, right? So that's the situation. So to get back to sort of the topic of the episode today, is that some companies are starting to use some technology to keep an eye on what's going on, to be able to say, yes, we actually do due diligence and we actually follow what really happens, right? And there's different ways to do that. So, for example, wood products, right? So there's also a new regulation coming up about deforestation in the EU, right? So if you're part of the scheme by FSC, or I forget, there's another one. There's two schemes that are rather well thought, including FSC. Okay, it might be the most famous one. So if you want your product, the end product, to have the FSC logo, right? Whether it is made of paper, cardboard, some kind of wood or bamboo, it's amazing how many products actually are wood based, right? So if you want to put the FSC logo on it, well, there has to be a chain of custody all the way up to the forest, right? So that there's actually confidence that the end product comes from a what is it? I forget whatever they call it specifically, but forest that is more or less sustainable, right? And every actor in that supply chain has to be certified by FSC, right? So that's one approach to this. Okay. Another approach is to map the supply chain. So this became a very hot topic during COVID, right? Oh, I want to map the supply chain because then I want to know if, I don't know, if there's a major outbreak in that province of China, I need to know if I have some of my production, my upstream production up there, right? So I can actually foresee, rather than waiting for the last minute and then my tier one supplier says, oh yeah, sorry, with that component, oh, we didn't know it was like this because it's the tier 3 supplier, right? So other companies try to map supply chain, and then a bunch of software companies jumped on the bandwagon and say, oh yeah, we can map the supply chain, right? And again, for very big companies, yeah, you send a link, you force your supplier to use a certain software, and they go in there and they start to input information, right? You buy $1 billion for a year from them, they're going to make an effort, right? And probably there's enough incentive for their own suppliers to also make an effort. But for everybody, apart from the very big companies, mapping the supply chain beyond tier 1 is extremely difficult.
Because you don't know what's going to go in there. If they give information that's not right and it goes in there, and then you receive this in your office in, Germany or wherever you are, right, you're still not going to know.
That's one of the key challenges, yeah. But so let's say you buy, I don't know, you buy some earbuds, all right? So you buy some earbuds, or like AirPods, something like that. You ask your direct supplier, maybe they're in Shenzhen, all right? So they're going to say, yes, we are in Shenzhen, and we have this manufacturing place right here, and we put it together, right? And we package it and we send it to you. Okay, great. What about the tier 2 suppliers, right? What is the plastic, the plastic parts, where do they come from, and the PCBA boards, and the battery, and these sensors, and so on and so forth, and the packaging materials and so on. Well, if you never worked with them on an open BOM, open bill of materials, they're not going to tell you all the details of it, right? So what you might come out is, you might say, well, right here, the components of interest are there's a lot of plastic, so the plastic parts and the battery and the PCBA. That's it. These are the 3 interesting parts. And then if they really are cooperative, they will say, okay, well, these plastic parts come from a factory in Huizhou. These are the ones, that factory in Dongguan. The PCBA comes from this place in Shenzhen, and the battery from another place in Shenzhen, but we're not going to tell you who. Okay, right? So they might give a little bit of transparency on like the identity of 1 or 2 key suppliers, maybe, if you're lucky, and the rest, at least they can tell you, okay, it's in that city, right? And then that's the end. Like there's usually there's nothing more you can get out of it, right? So you might ask, okay, like what kind of plastic is it? What kind of battery technology is it? Give me the spec sheet of the battery. Sometimes good luck to get that even. But usually that's going to be it, right? So mapping the supply chain is a great concept, but in practice, it's very limited. What you can get out of it is very, very limited. You're not going to do like Toyota or Ford, so forget it, right? You don't even have the staff to keep going down the supply chain and go on site to verify and so on anyway. So if you get some declarations that cannot be verified also, what's the value of it, right? You buy some, I don't know, you buy some textile products and you say, well, where is it dyed? Where's the dyeing house? Oh, it's over there in Shaoxing, yeah, but, okay, can we go? It's our supplier. You can trust us. What do you want to know? Well, I want to know if they treat the wastewater after, because these kinds of dyes are very polluting. And your supplier will say, oh, okay, we just checked. It's okay. They have a system to treat the water after. So it's not sent directly to the river. That's what you want to know, right? And then what do you do with that? It's better than nothing, but it's not much better than nothing, right? It's really not much better at all, because how can you trust, right? So mapping the supply chain is a very interesting idea, and it's good for tier one. It's good if you can identify the risks. Where are the risks? What parts constitute some risk? Okay, here's some, I don't know, some casting. Okay, consumers a lot of energy. Boom, risk. Oh, here's, they do that coating here or whatever. Oh, okay, we know there might be some nickel here. Boom, okay, that's a risk. These kinds of things. And then you can ask for a little bit of information. And that's usually all you will get, right? So I'm not very encouraging here, right? I'm not very encouraging.
It doesn't sound like it's enough.
If you get caught and the customs or the market surveillance authorities think, hey, this is a high-risk product for such and such reason, you will not be able to defend yourself. Basically, that's what it means, right? And yeah, these especially the forced labor laws, forced labor, doing due diligence in your supply chain, this is not going to be enough. So there's going to be quite a bit of, how would I say, of conflict between the exporters, and not just in China, by the way. This is going to be a challenge for exporters in Indonesia, in Vietnam, in Mexico, wherever, right? It is going to be a challenge. But even for companies in the EU, if you produce in the EU, you also have to do that kind of due diligence anyway, right? So it's going to be a challenge for sort of everybody. The EU is rather ambitious on this. They really want to go fast and have a big impact. That's it. And finally, a kind of technology that is getting quite popular, it seems, is to put some little trackers, just an IoT product. Boop, you put it there. It's got a battery. It's got a GPS module to know where it is, and it's got some kind of, sometimes something like 4G, 5G, or something like that, or sometimes nothing at all. It might have to sometimes send some information about where it is, right? But sometimes it seems like some of them don't even have that. Okay, so for example, in a very simple way, if you want to track your container, right, you send it to your shipper, they put it in the container when it's shipped out. And then anytime you can track, okay, where's my container, and sort of what is the humidity, what is the temperature, these kind of things. And when it arrives, you get it back, so if it could transmit the data to you, okay, that's fine. You don't need to do anything special. If it could not transmit the data, maybe you were just monitoring the temperature and humidity to put pressure on the transportation company. Maybe your goods have to be refrigerated or something like that. Then you read it, you get the data, you get all the logs, and then, okay, you send it back to the shipper for next time, right? So this is this is something that's already on the market. I don't remember the names of the companies. I remember at the Consumer Electronics Show earlier this year, there were at least 2 companies doing that. Okay, so that's in a simple way. Now, some companies in the Wall Street Journal article that you mentioned earlier, they say that Ralph Lauren and Adidas and a few other companies, they use the product of a startup called Trust Trace. Okay, and what they do is they put the little tracker on some of their the materials. Okay, that will be input to several manufacturing processes, and it just follows the materials, the batch of materials, and then that's a way for the, again, Ralph Lauren, Adidas, and so on, to have some monitoring. Okay, well, is this batch of materials that went through here to be processed, went over there, then went over there, and then it's here in the form of a finished product or a component ready to use in our own factory, right? So then they can actually say, well, this is clear and objective evidence that, yeah, it's that batch of material, and then it went here and then went here. Like, we know the supply chain, right? And for example, for forest product, for wood products, you would have your wood logs, and then you could work with that forest management company, say, okay, here's the tracker, and then it follows all along the supply chain, right? Okay, then it went to that place where they cut it, and then it went to that place where they did that further treatment on the wood, and then and then it arrives here. So we know, and we can prove where, this product, I have traceability all the way to that batch at the forest, right?
And the forest in question is important here, because you want to prove that, it's not a forest like in the rainforest where they're, deforesting the, sensitive areas and places like that.
Yeah. It's a forest that's actively managed, and there's like, they have cycles of whatever, 20 years of, we plant and we let it grow, and we take care of it, and then we cut, and then we plant again, and so on, right? But it's not a one of these virgin forests that have a lot of special biodiversity and so on that you really want to conserve, right? Yeah. So there's this different, they also talk about Wiliot, WILIOT, very small tracking tags, and with some big investments from Amazon, PepsiCo, Samsung, right? So this kind of little IoT trackers definitely has, a role to play, because it's very, very cheap, and you reuse it, right? So you might use the same device to track whatever, 20 different batches of materials or more, right? And maybe you don't put it in every batch. Maybe you do it randomly to keep a bit of pressure or whatever, right? But that's a way for companies to really go, in the food industry, they call it farm to fork, right?
Yeah.
Or, like in leather, they have something like cow to, I forget what they call it. Anyway, to really have visibility over your entire upstream supply chain. But again, if your business model is to buy some tablets for cheap in Shenzhen and sell them somewhere, and you know nothing about all this because the tablet is the ODM product of that manufacturer, and because it doesn't make any sense for you to do all the R&D to develop your own tablet, well, all of this is not working. You have no clue, and there's no way that you can get a clue, right? If you send POs of $50,000, $100,000 here and there, well, it's nowhere near enough, right? So you need to sort of rethink your business model here a bit and really take note of these upcoming regulations and see how you're going to adapt. And then,
well, I think it's almost safe to say at this point, because it's coming so soon, that some smaller businesses, such as those that you've just mentioned, maybe they're buying in relatively small amounts, they're white labeling products with their logo. they might ultimately be forced out of the EU market by the EU
Right.
Commission.
Oh, yeah.
And what's more, the EU Commission are okay with that because that's kind of what they
Totally.
want to happen.
Totally. They want to drive certain behaviors. They have already done a lot of consultations with EU companies, importers, manufacturers, etc., and they're going ahead with it. The train is is on the way, right? In terms of timing, is really very, very important to understand. If you wait for the final proposal to be, the final version of the text to be voted by the EU Parliament, then you only have 12 to 18 months maybe until it's enforced in place. That's not enough time to start to develop your own products and to pivot your business model and everything. You can't wait until you have full clarity. You actually need to look into what these different, statements of intent from the EU Commission actually say, right? Very important.
And now.
Yeah, exactly. And now, yes. Yeah. So sorry for the note of deep optimism here.
Well, look, the good point is there's time. So if you're listening to this thinking, this does not sound good, I don't know if I'm prepared for this, and I am importing into the EU, there is time, but time is now growing shorter. And that's why we've covered this, more than once. I suppose the best advice at this point would be to, start looking into it where your business is concerned. And, listeners are free to get in touch with us, of course, because we are helping some people with this already, aren't we?
Yeah, collecting information, doing a bit of due diligence to the supply chain, requesting some documents to see if they have something. And if they have something, then going on site to verify it. Yes, this is the kind of things we've started to do for some companies. We've been doing auditing, various kinds of due diligence for more than 10 years, but there's more and more of this ESG, environment, social governance type of due diligence, that people are carrying out with some voluntary schemes such as, EcoVadis and so on that are pushed by the big customers, but also now is the big customers just looking at the upcoming regulation and saying, hey, we need to put the system in place right now. So we are seeing changes, yes.
One positive, I suppose, is access to China has gotten better now for foreign buyers. So if you do need to go to China and speak to your suppliers, doing it in person, we can all agree, is going to make this process easier. So maybe a combination of you actually visiting suppliers in China and explaining the situation to them and starting to get them motivated to help you, and maybe getting assistance from, boots on the ground in China, whether that's, third-party businesses who can actually help when you're not there as well. And that's probably a good way to get going on it.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Renaud. Interesting topic, important topic. And we spoke mainly about the EU. Would it, we can't say that this is coming in all countries and all regions very, very soon, but it's probably fair to say that it's not only going to be the EU that does this kind of thing.
So the EU is leading the way. We have some countries like Australia, like Canada, that are really looking into this with interest, right? And then you have certain states of the US, California, New York, and so on, that are also looking at this with interest. And they will follow in their own ways. But really, the EU is definitely leading the pack here, for sure.
So keep it on your radar, because this is probably going to be an ongoing trend. So we need to be aware of this. Thanks, Renaud. And once again, check the show notes for some good links to other content and podcasts that cover this topic. We've got written content which will introduce things like the eco-design for sustainability regulation, which featured in what we've been speaking about today. That's really worth reading if you want to get a grounding in, what this is all about and how it affects you. Next week, we'll be back again. Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.